when I was about 9, maybe give or take. I was always very focused, always very independent. My mom always tell the story. There was one particular day on Saturday, I woke up, wore my school uniform, and I came to her room to wake her up to take me to school. And she was like, it's a Saturday. And I burst out in tears. And my dad is very big on having a career. So it wasn't just about having a job. You need to be a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor. Like it had to be like something professional.
When I look at you going from entry internship positions to eventually scaling all the way to like becoming a VP at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, which obviously like a 15-year kind of transition, that's still not very easy for you to be able to make that kind of move from the bottom where you started all the way to holding 10 billion in assets and lending.
5 or 6 years in, I then got this one manager. We had a rocky start, I would say. If we're in a meeting together, behind closed doors, he didn't play. This guy is teaching you exactly what you need to learn. Don't fight against your own growth.
Welcome to Everyday Leadership. Today I have a friend, a namesake actually.
A namesake.
No namesake as well. You know, there's not that many
That's
of
right.
us, so
That's right.
there's not that many of us. But who is a speaker, corporate trainer, author of the multi-award-winning book Visibility of Visible Strengths, shall I say, and is a career strategist and CEO of Visible Strengths 𝐭, which is an academy that helps early career professionals. And she's someone who has been in the game for 15 plus years, working with some amazing companies, you know, the McKinseys, the Bankers of Americas, the Metas, the Barclays, the Accentures, a long list of clients who she's been able to lend her services to in so many different areas that we're going to delve into today. I'm talking about Mary Mosope Adeyemi. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's great to be here. Yes. My namesake. Wow. There are not that many of us, actually. There are not many people with that name that are called Shopwell. So I'm always very excited to meet one.
Well, when we were on stage at Warwick, which is where we met a number of years ago, I was like, Mary Mosope, I was like, like, okay, we're definitely gonna become friends.
And here we are,
And
many
here we
years
are.
later.
Many years later, we are here indeed. And I really just want to have a conversation with you because you are someone whose career has touched a lot of points and you've been able to step into a lot of areas which people always think like, oh my gosh, when I think about what career should look like, it is this. And you've been able to do that and then pivot from that into what you're doing right now. And it's
Mm-hmm.
always great to be able to learn and understand like what that journey and transition was like. So if I wheel it back to 7-year-old Mary in Nigeria, what were you like them days?
7-year-old Mary in Nigeria. Don't know that I remember how much. I think my earliest memories of myself was probably would be when I was about 9, maybe give or take. I was always very focused, always very independent. Um, I was always very kind, although in a very quiet way. Like I was very kind, but I also didn't want anybody getting into my space. It was a very strange character. But I was very kind. Like, and I think I naturally just had um I liked people and I wanted to be liked. And that was always like one thing, but I was an independent thinker, very focused. You didn't have to I always remember not I was never forced to do homework or go to school. Like I love my mom always tell the story that on there was one particular day on Saturday I woke up, wore my school uniform, and I came to her room to wake her up to take me to school. And she was like, it's a Saturday, and I burst out in tears and I wailed outside her room. She still says it till today. Like I wailed outside her room because I couldn't go to school. It's like I don't know that many children who would do that. But that, I think, kind of sums up really who I liked school, I liked studying, I liked learning, I liked being around like the classroom. And she just always found it quite bizarre. But that's fundamentally who I was then. And I think, I mean, a lot has changed since then, but the elements of that they still very much are the same. And these stories come up because my niece, so my brother's daughter, is exactly like that. And my brother was just not. My brother was the one who was sleeping on the Saturday. In fact, probably sleeping on the Monday to the Friday. And so when his child is exhibiting my type of behavior, my mother is like, oh my God, you're just like your auntie. Because I remember, so these stories will come up when, when she does stuff that makes people remember me when I was her age. And she's 7, interestingly enough. So she's 7 now. And those conversations will come up and be like, oh wow, like you are literally exactly like your auntie as a child. Like you're very like focused. I sit by myself and read a book the whole day without without being like, I wasn't the like go out play. I would just sit still with my book. For her, it's an iPad now, and I would just sit, entertain myself, and I'll be good. Yeah. So yeah, I still very much I'm like that. I think that's the introverted part of me, was like I'm totally I'm comfortable in my own space, and yeah, just very much of an independent thinker. Yeah.
Do you have an idea of who or what you wanted to become, or were you inspired by any of the things you were reading around you at that point in time?
That's an interesting question. My decisions around what I wanted to become was almost by elimination rather than by intention. So it was a way. So now I teach a lot about building your career with intention, but that's actually not how I built my career, by elimination. I thought about the things I did not want to do, and then thought, oh, what's left? And bear in mind, I'm growing up in the 80s, early 90s. So there are fewer career options than what there are now. And so it was more like, growing up in Nigeria, you had a few, and my dad is very big on having a career. So it wasn't just about having a job. It was about having like, you need to be a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor. Like it had to be like something professional. Like it wasn't just enough to just work in the office. You had to have something of prestige with a certification. So that was always like the goal. And I knew, okay, I don't like blood, so definitely not the doctor. That was my process of elimination. I was like, oh, I don't like blood. I don't like injections. So there's no way I would function in that environment. I don't want to be a lawyer because I used to watch a lot of Indian movies and all the lawyers used to get killed. So as a child, I thought the only job a lawyer would do was to go to court, right? So for me, I always saw like law as litigation and court defense and that type of thing. I didn't ever think that there was another like corporate law. I never even knew what that was. I just always used to see like in the Indian movies we used to watch back home in Nigeria, all the lawyers would get killed. And I was like, oh, not me. I want to live a long, happy life. So that was like muscle elimination. I was never really big on sciences, even though I did very well with them in school. Like I had A's in physics, chemistry, biology, and the like, but I was never, and I did what they call information technology, infotech, which is called infotech. It was information technology, and it was all of the things, but I just knew like it just wasn't, it didn't interest me. So by the time I eliminated all of that, it ended up being like, okay, maybe I'll just do accounting. Fair enough. I think it was just that. I'll just do accounting. And then there was an auntie of mine who was an accountant, and she was always dressed so fab. She'll come to the house. She looked good, drove a beautiful car. She was a single lady at the time. I can't remember how old she was, but I just think, oh wow, that's glam. This is nice. And so yeah, that kind of maybe pushed me more in that direction. And as I started studying, I realized that actually the maths, the economics, the business, the accounting, that actually came very naturally to me. Like I didn't struggle at all to understand the concepts or to learn it. So yeah, so that's where maybe the intentionality came in. But it really started from just like, what don't I want to do? What do I think is like a no? And then, okay, if we have this particular option, then do you even like it? Do you care? And so when I started studying, I was like, actually, this is not bad. And so that was how I went down the pathway of accounting and eventually accounting and finance at uni. But one thing was always clear, like throughout studying, I did not struggle with finance. Like when it came to like academia, and people were like, "Oh my God," I think I breezed through. I mean, there were obviously hard moments, but I don't. Nothing really stands out as exceptionally difficult when I was at uni. Like from in terms of what I was studying was actually the other stuff that I didn't like. It was actually law. I remember doing a law course and thinking, heck no, like heck no. It was all the other stuff that was outside of accounting and finance that I didn't enjoy much. But the core of my degree, and I did one of these degrees that had a lot of things in it. I did accounting and finance, economics, law, and like statistics. So it had a bunch of different things in it. So which was nice. I learned a lot of stuff, but yeah, I knew very quickly like I don't ever want to be doing this in my work, in my job. Yeah. And yeah, and that was kind of how the foray of accounting and
All right.
finance began, really.
It's interesting when I listened to you break it down, you applied a very logical process of elimination from a very young age. And I hear you talk about accountancy and finance and those kind of things just coming natural to you. You can actually start to see the way your brain works and the way your brain
Yes.
moves and kind of operates when you start to think about stuff. But you moved from Nigeria at 16 to the UK and obviously
Yeah.
went to university and everything else. Was that move for you an easy one, an easy transition to be able to make? Different environment, different culture, or was it something that it took you a while to adjust?
Nah, it was well, there was difficult elements. But again, I don't remember. I was excited to leave home. I was young, but I was excited to leave home because I'd left high school very early. I left high school at 14. Um, so I started very early. I left very early. I had a 2 year sort of gap in between where I was like, my parents were like, "You're too young to go to uni. No one's even going to take you. Um, but what are you going to do with yourself?" So I was basically doing like, so I did A
Wait a minute.
level.
How did you start early and finish early? Was it like child
Back
prodigy,
then
like scholarship?
no, no, in Nigeria, they didn't hold at the time. I believe that's different now, but at the time they didn't hold us back with age. So there was never this concept of if you are, here in this, if you're born after a certain month, you have to start school the next year. They didn't have all of that. It was pretty much if you're done your 5 years of primary school, then you move into secondary school. It was pretty much that. And primary school for me nursery school actually moved very quickly because I skipped like three steps in between. So when I started primary school, I started very young. I left primary school at 7, actually. I left primary school at 7, just before I turned 8. And my entrance exams into secondary school, I had just turned 8 in June and I started school in October. So I was the youngest in my class by a good, all my peers are like at least 18 months to 2 years older than I am, between 12 and 24 months generally. So I started early. So most of my peers were 9, 10, and I was 8. And I was a young 8, like I had just turned 8. So by the time we left school, they were 15, 16, I was 14. And so they were all like starting to go off to uni or, at least go into like A levels and the like. That was actually when I was held back because it was like, well, where are you going? So my peers were traveling abroad to start A levels. My parent was like, I can't send you anywhere at 14 years old to do anything. So you're just going to hang back, which I did. So I did like what was like the quintessential like computer college back then. Because now we all have devices. When I was in school, I didn't own a laptop. Like this was like, so back then I didn't own a PC whilst I was in high school. It wasn't a thing. So I never did any of my courses, my program, nothing was on the PC. So after that, I went to computer college to learn Microsoft Word. and to learn like some coding languages and things like that. Like it was a whole different world when I think about it. We're doing DOS prompts.
Remember
Like
those? I remember
that was
those.
pretty much what it is. We're doing DOS prompts with the black screen and the green like little thing, and you had to learn all these DOS prompts. And I had books and pages of DOS prompts to do simple things. And it was somewhere along those lines. I think that we got maybe like Windows 97, and yeah, and then we all started using Windows 97, and that was kind of how you started learning how to do word processing. But that's like after high school for me. So I spent like a year or so, 6 months or something like that doing that, and pretty much just whiling away time whilst doing that. And then I started researching colleges in the UK. I quickly realized like I was not going to get into university straight off the bat. So whatever I was going to do, I had to still do like a transition program, even though I'd done my A levels. So I'd done my A levels, I was ready to move, but there was just this 1 year where it was like, no one's going to take you in at 16. You're a minor. And so I moved to the UK. This was 2004, so 20 years actually this year, 2004. January, and I went to a college in Oxford, um, Oxford Media Business, Oxford Media and Business School. So I did like a 9 month program, and then I shortly got like admission into Lancaster University. So yeah, so I started Lancaster University September of 2004. Yeah, so that was pretty much, yeah. I turned
Okay.
17 the
It's
June
also
before.
interesting actually when you think about your education at university and then coming to the UK and studying, how much did your education in Nigeria prepare you to be able to just excel in the education system? The reason I ask you that question is I always have this debate back and forth with people. I'm like, there's so much stuff that we were learning when we were young. And then
Hmm.
when I moved from Nigeria to here, I was like, rah, we're way we're way advanced than what people are picking up. And people are like, were you? It's just Nigeria. I'm like, yes, it's Nigeria, but the schooling system and what you learn is very, very different. And obviously, you were in it longer than I was, so you better speak to it more than I can.
Mm. I mean, I didn't study. All my formative learning was in Nigeria, and yeah, like we studied aggressively. We had a very, we studied and we had after school programs. We had lesson teachers. We had a very rigorous form of study back in Nigeria. However, we were taught we were taught the end results, but rarely the process. That was the big difference for me. Was you were taught to learn the formula. This goes here, this goes here, this goes to the left, this goes to the right, but not the understanding of why it has to be on the left and on the right. Like, so that thinking was something that I could pass any exam, I could cram, I could regurgitate, I could replicate a process that I had seen and studied and all of that. But I found like when you start doing A levels, you realize like it's not about regurgitation, it's about being able to explain your thinking. And that's where I think a lot of people coming from that world, coming from Nigeria, parts of Africa, I think we're not necessarily taught that way. I have a feeling that has changed a lot. Because there's definitely much more integration with the British system, in particular in Nigeria. I think that has moved on a lot, but at the time, it wasn't. I won't say it was a huge struggle. Because on the other hand, my dad was very big on explain to me what you're doing. So I think as much as I wasn't being taught it specifically, I had a household where my dad was always like, what do you like? Explain what you're. So I was almost forced to start thinking that way. And so when I came to uni, that was the transition I had to make. That it wasn't just about just regurgitating information. I needed to understand what it was. But I had some phenomenal teachers when I was at uni. phenomenal teachers that really broke everything down in a way that you're like, I get it. Yeah, I get it, and I would never forget it. Yeah, so I had some really fantastic. So that for me was the again, like, I didn't find academia difficult. So when you use the word like challenging and difficult, those don't resonate with me. I just didn't really experience that. But I knew like I had to climb up the curve. I liked studying, so maybe studying wasn't, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, this is the weird parts of me that you're seeing. I think I liked studying, so studying was never hard. So I didn't, I just, I didn't experience that. I just, sorry. This is the weird part of
There's
what most
nothing.
people consider very weird. Yeah,
Why?
so that was just
Imagine
pretty much a transition.
having a love of studying and knowledge and wisdom and critical thinking and so many different others. Actually, I think is a good thing because I think what makes it weird is a lot of people who just accumulate knowledge for knowledge's sake. And then
Mm,
there are people who accumulate knowledge and then they take action, which turns into wisdom. And I think that's probably what the difference is. I actually think it's a good thing because you did that. Obviously, you got your first. You wanted to get your masters, and then you began your career. Like, you had an internship at Deutsche Bank and then Bank of America, and you kind of started building it from there. And when I look at you going from entry internship positions to eventually scaling all the way to like becoming a VP at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, which obviously like a 15-year kind of transition. That's still not very easy for you to be able to make that kind of move from the bottom where you started all the way to holding 10 billion in assets and lending, which is quite a lot of money, a lofty position, hard work to kind of get there. What was that journey like for you?
um, I think this is where hard came in. Yeah, I think this is the point where hard came in. Yeah, because I think my transition into work was not the smoothest. So yes, I had the internships, um, and came into the world of work, but there's an entirely different playbook with work that became apparent once I joined. And I didn't have the background to cope with it. I again, academia is not, it was not hard, but school is not, like, work is not school, basically. Work is not school. There's a lot more, you might see a specific situation, and it's how you think about it. It's and the work, I mean, I was as a risk manager for most of my career, and the work, and whilst that relied very heavily on understanding financial statements and all of that, it was really, the most important output was not understanding the financials. It was about being able to make business decisions based on what you were seeing. So it was about switching technical knowledge into commercial awareness,
Mm.
um, and using that to make critical decisions and do a number of different things. And I just was not clued up into that. And then also, I struggled with people. I think I would say I'm a lot better at it now, but I struggled with people. I've always been very independent and very, like, say it as it is. So I think my style needed a little bit more fine tuning. Um, and yeah, these are some of the things that caused a lot of difficulty for me when I joined. So it wasn't that I couldn't do the job. I could do the job very well, actually, but I was rough around the edges when it comes down to it, and not in the way people will think. Like, I was very poised, very well spoken, all of those things. I dressed well, I looked good. That was never the issue. So I didn't look rough, but there were just areas in my communication and in my style of working and things that I think could definitely, I would have benefited from a lot more guidance earlier on. So that's actually where those were where like the challenges, came in, or where I always felt like, do I even know what I'm doing? Am I even in the right place? So I really questioned myself a lot. And I remember and I also started my career in a difficult season. I started my career in the middle of the financial crisis of 2007. So nobody was holding anybody's hand to guide. Everyone was just trying to survive. People were just trying to pay their mortgage, not get their homes taken away from them, not trying to get fired. Everybody was busy minding their own ship. And so you coming in, junior person in the workplace, you're just like, keep your head down and try and avoid the cuts, basically. I had peers that had gone to training with global training in Charlotte. We had all gone to global training in Charlotte, and I had peers who had lost their jobs. Like within 3 months of getting a contract, they were, and for me as an immigrant, that held bigger consequences. It wasn't just about losing my job. It was about, you lose your job. If you don't get another one, you leave, you go home. So there were much bigger consequences. So a lot of that made me get a lot more introspective, a lot more quiet, a lot more frazzled and fearful. So this was a season where I think things became hard. It was almost unbearable. So like the first 5 years, 4 5 years, most of it felt difficult. When I think about it, most of it felt difficult. But on paper, I was doing phenomenal. On paper, I was doing well. I was getting, even with all of this, I got my first promotion. You're getting the job, you're getting the internship, you're getting the job, I got my first promotion, all of that. But inside I was like, what is this? Yeah.
5 years,
That's actually what I remember the most. Yeah.
5 years is a very
A
long
long time.
time to go through that internally.
Yeah.
How did you get through it? Like, did you
It's a
have
long
any
time. A long
help,
time.
mentorship, friends? Like, how did you get through?
Um, yeah, you have friends. Everybody kind of shared their own version of trauma that they were experiencing. I had some really good bosses in the time that were helpful. But I also, when I think in hindsight, I also think that they coddled me a little bit. Like they protected me rather than pushed me. But they were nice. They were nice. They were nice people. But it's not every time you need nice. Sometimes you just need frank, and you need a wake up call, and not in a destructive way, but in a constructive way. I think there were seasons where I felt like in hindsight, I felt like I could have maybe done with more like constructive push, and strategy. But yeah, I mean, it feels like a distant memory now, but I'm thinking about it and thinking to myself, I had some really cool managers, super supportive, all of that. Yeah, super supportive people that would come into the office. I had really lovely colleagues as well. I had really good friends at work. So it was bearable, but I just knew that something just wasn't quite sitting right. Like I could do more. I could There was something missing. I was doing the work, but I felt like I wasn't reaping the rewards of the work that I was doing. I think I was largely invisible in my mind. So I was largely invisible. So I was doing the work, but I was just another employee. You couldn't fault my work, but I wasn't a star student. And coming from a world where I was always a star student, that was never like, can I say that with all of you? All humility. I was like, I was always a star student, and suddenly I'm like, what is happening right now? And maybe it's when you work for these types of like large organizations, I mean, they're hiring the best of the best. And so you are now competing this is the first time I was competing with my peers. Before, I was just competing with a bunch of people who were my age. But now I was competing with my intellectual peers. And that was like, ooh, okay. People with, and I was working in Europe, a context I didn't grow up in. And so, what my colleague who grew up in Luxembourg and has been to 20 European countries would understand. I was like coming from behind. I didn't get it. So I was just not commercially aware. So I had to really climb up that curve in order to do my job even better. And so yeah, so it took me a while to just really feel like I was finding my feet. And then I think about, yeah, maybe 5 or 6 years in, I then got this one manager who happened to be Nigerian actually. Um, and so that's a whole different story. But I was just like, okay, this Nigerian guy, da da da. And he comes in, and I think we had a rocky start, I would say, but he became like one of my biggest allies, mentor, and sponsor, I would say. It was a big, and I say that intentionally because he did not coddle me. He protected me, but he did not coddle me. So when we went, if he was in a room and people said something, he would support me. He would push me up for opportunities. He would do stuff. But if we're in a meeting together behind closed doors, he didn't play. Like he literally would be like, "Yo, I would suggest you don't do that again." He would tell me straight up, like it was basically the type of straight up feedback that I needed. And it was irritating at first. And I've told him this multiple times. It was irritating because I was like, who's this guy? This guy hates me. But I I started to see wisdom in it. And some days I wonder if like I was able to receive it because he was Nigerian. In fact, let's even not even go Nigerian, maybe because he was black. I was able to receive it. Because oftentimes what people call discrimination today is really just discipline difficulty. And I'm not suggesting that there's no discrimination, but sometimes there are people who will tell you the truth, but because you don't want to hear it, we call it discrimination. But if that person looked different, will you receive it? And so that was a big thing for me. Like, so I feel like maybe I was able to receive it because it was him. But I wonder if it was somebody else, I might have just ended up saying, oh, they don't like me because, oh, they're being passive aggressive or whatever other words that we use these days, right? But in this case, I didn't have that. I didn't have those to fall back on. It just wasn't there. So it wasn't a black thing. It wasn't any of that. And yeah, for a number of reasons, I knew it wasn't a gender thing either. He just genuinely was like, you can do so much more. I can actually see,
Capable of.
I can see what you're capable of, but you're not positioning yourself correctly. You're not speaking up in meetings. You're not challenging. You're not doing hard things. You are coasting.
It's interesting when I think about what you said earlier on around those previous managers that you had cuddled you, and that wasn't what you needed. When you finally get what it is that you actually need, first you didn't like it.
Yeah, I was like, yo, what is this?
So when you were that you did not, it was not what you needed. You get used to it. When you get what you actually want, there's always that initial pushback that happens, and it happens every
Yeah,
single time. I always find that fascinating with us as human
yeah,
beings.
absolutely. It's a shock. It's a shock because there's the pride, there's the how dare you, where are you coming from? I've been here. Um, I mean, and it was coming into the team at the time. I'd probably been in the team, and it's odd that I was not the most senior person, but I was the most tenured person in the team. There was so much attrition in our department that to find someone who had been at that department for 6 years was tough.
Mm.
And in my team in particular, we were like a revolving door. At one point, it was like people were coming in 6 months later, they were gone. It was just so crazy. So when he came down to it, there was a point where I was the most tenured member of the team. I was the one who knew everything from beginning to end. I could tell you the story of every client because I had been there. Everybody else had not. And so there was so much value in that. But instead of capitalizing on that or positioning myself with that, I was shrinking. And so this is what he saw. I was like, what are you doing? Seriously, what are you doing? You know? And I was just like, yo, go away. Like, I was doing okay before you got here. And I also felt maybe like, because again, I felt maybe exposed. I felt like, you know, he's maybe because we had that same background. I was like, dude, like, don't come and bust my cover. Like, you know, I think a lot of times, like, you know, people talk about this imposter syndrome, like the day they're going to find me out. And I literally just felt like, okay, this dude is coming to bust my cover and, you know, he's too close for comfort. And I was just, you know, I rejected it very strongly. And he was super detailed. You know, again, I had people who would collect something from me and it was okay and they would just go, okay, cool, submit. He would sit and like mark everything like a teacher. And I was thinking, what guy, really, can we submit this paper? Can we move on? And I was so inundated. I was busy and I thrived on busy. I've got so much to do. Just gotta, you know, and it was like quality. Like, yeah, you have a lot to do, but what is the quality of what you are delivering? Like, so he was very detailed, very detailed. He's, you know, also a bit of a micromanager, but he was a very detailed guy. You know, if we had diligence to do on clients, he would also read the diligence materials over the weekend. I never had bosses that read diligence materials over the weekend. They would leave it to me to do, and wherever I landed on it is what they would take. He would go and read it. I think it also showed maybe it was a trust thing, maybe it was I don't even know. There was a lot going on there. But because I knew he was reading this stuff, I had to buck up. Again, he did not give anybody, this is not just me, he did not give anybody room to coast. And the thing is that he was doing it and I knew that people did not like him for it. Lots of other people in the team did not like him for it. Lots of his own peers did not like him for it because technically in my mind, he was the smartest guy in the room. Like, sharpest guy in the room. He wasn't the most friendly. He wasn't a relationship person per se, but he was the smartest guy in the room in terms of like getting the job done. He was sharp. But as we know in these organizations, his relationships and all those things are kind of, you know, and he wasn't the softest person. That's my politically correct way of saying what I want to say. He wasn't the softest person. But yeah, but I think in the moment where everybody pushed back, including myself, everybody pushed back, like, who is this dude? There was just a moment where it clicked and I said, you know what? This guy is teaching you exactly what you need to learn. Like, don't fight against your own growth. There was just a moment where I was like, that just clicked for me. Like, don't fight against your own growth. And that was it. And so instead of seeing everything he did as like, oh, he's micromanaging me, I became like an apprentice. I can't remember exactly the moment when everything switched. I just remember like, I started asking him, what do you think about this? What do you think about? I started becoming even more ravenous about learning from him and how he was thinking. Because that was the sharpest thing about him, was the way things connected in his mind. And I was like, that's super cool. And I just opened myself up to learning from him. And that was probably the point where a lot of things started changing for me. The way I became super strategic about work, the way I was showing up. I wasn't necessarily working harder, but I was just working smarter. I was being selective about things that I was doing. I was speaking up more. He was encouraging me to speak up more. He was pushing me, challenging me on every side, asking me to do stuff that I was like, guy, I don't can't do this thing, oh. But he would like, you can, and we will get it done. Presentations I had no business doing, I was doing, you know. And beyond that, he was just I realized at one point this guy has my back big time. And I think that made me respect him a lot. Yeah, I think so. Whenever we
That
talk about representation and we talk about sponsorship, that's what that looked like for me. It wasn't about it's not about somebody cuddling you and using relationship metrics. It's about somebody backing you, but also grooming you whilst they're backing you to ensure that when those opportunities do open up, you are not going to embarrass yourself and you're not going to embarrass them. But that was like, but there's a big emphasis. There's sometimes often there's sometimes often an underestimation of how much teaching and mentorship that a sponsor needs to have. I think that's never really spoken about. It's almost like, yeah, sponsor will open up doors for you. Yeah. But then what do you do when the door is opened up? That's also in some ways the sponsor's really like responsibility. That I'm going to open up doors for this person, but I'm also going to make sure that they're ready when that door is open. And that for me was the first person that did that for me in a tangible way, and it made a huge difference.
when he brought you into the light, when you started to learn and grow and develop and push back and all of that, was that roughly the same time you started reachability and you started stepping into
I
that as
started
well?
with maybe short, like not really, maybe a few years after. Um, I would say maybe 3 or 4 years after was when I started reachability. Because yeah, all those lessons had now sunk in, and I
Mm.
had seen the benefit of that evolved thing. I'd seen the benefit of the playbook. He basically gave me the playbook, and I was like, oh, wow. So this is the workplace 101. This is the stuff I should learn. This is the stuff they should be teaching. Like this is the thing. Like, okay. So I had like seen it and been like, I get it. And I realized in that moment, there was just a lot of things came together for me. I realized actually, you have all of the skills and the interest to be extremely successful in this career, but you also have other things that you want to do, and there's space for that. You can, work was no longer a hard place. It was now an enabling environment. So my perspective changed a lot in that season. I just started seeing it as, this is the place I can grow. This is the place I can develop. This is the place I can. So I became excited. I went back to that girl who wanted to go to school on Saturday. That was basically how it was for me. I wanted to get stuff done. And I could see the impact of my work. I was closing big deals. I was getting involved with clients other people didn't have. I was becoming more trusted. I was getting into rooms that people were not in. I was helping to make decisions. I was so much more visible. I was being given platforms and stuff. He eventually left the firm. And we've still stayed in touch years later. He eventually left the firm, but by the time he left, I was standing on my 2 feet. But I also was not, one thing I realized, like I became smarter, but I didn't become more aggressive. In fact, I actually learned to be less noisy. Like we don't need to be talk. I don't need to talk all the time, but I knew like I needed to use my voice effectively.
It's
Um,
been aggressive a bad thing.
I don't think it's a bad thing if that's who you are, but I think some people become more aggressive because they think the workplace expects that of them. And if it's not your personality, then that's just you being inauthentic in some ways. And I found that there was a stage where I felt like I had to be fighting. Like, work was a war zone because it felt like I was always competing. But when you are now in a place where, nah, like you are competing, because I never think you should drop the ball there, but you also know that you you you've done what you need to do. It's like I have my receipts. I think it was basically that I was in a point where I was competing, but I wasn't competing with my mouth. I was competing with my receipts. So I didn't need to be shouting. So I just needed to make sure I was positioning correctly. I wasn't coming in to be like, oh my God. And I didn't need to undercut anyone. I didn't need to be underhanded in my moves. I just needed to be very clear about what I wanted, when I wanted it, and why I wanted it. And that was that. Like I just became very specific about my expectations. I was not guessing about the rate pace of my advancement. I was just very specific about what I wanted. If I wanted a promotion, I spoke about it. If I wasn't happy with my bonus or my pay, I spoke about it. But I wasn't saying it because I felt entitled. It was because I knew that I had built a bank of work that was bankable.
So you who spent 5 years being hidden, new manager comes in, calls you out after a couple of years. You've now got this bank of work. You're standing on 2 feet. You're getting your promotion. You're doing absolutely amazing. You're living the dream now. Why leave?
Um, so I think I started. There's a lot that's happened in between that, right? So this is all happening. Things are going well. So the teaching part of me perks back up.
Hmm.
And I'm like, how many more people, in particular women, and in particular women of color, who are like me, are slaving away in the workplace, struggling. That feeling of um, discontentment and frustration, but also feeling stuck where they were. How many people are experiencing that? So I started doing these like mentorship circles. I started doing other career development pieces of work. So my side of desk job became a lot about people development. So whether it was within my department or outside, I was involved in training, in hiring, in recruitment, in developing programs, in doing a bunch of things. There was also a flagship program we started at the time, a Bank of America called the Africa Program. I was one of the key members of that team. So a lot to do with people, I think, and I was just so passionate about. I was just driven by my own lived experience. To be fair, I was like, there's so many competent, capable people, but they keep on checking out of the workplace because they just don't
Lost.
know.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of pretty much what was driving me. And so I started doing a lot of work there while still doing my core role as a risk manager and credit investor. So I was just juggling and doing stuff. I think that is then what grew and then became what I started doing outside, which was visibility. And so I started like, you know, I wanted more women to be visible. I wanted more women to own their magic. Cause that was really my own transition. It's not that I was not good at my job. I just was not owning my work. I wasn't owning my results. And I didn't even see my results as results. I was just working, and that was the big transition for me, was being more visible, really owning what I was doing, being selective and strategic about my work, and building the relationships that I needed to excel and grow, within the organization, right? So that was pretty much what I started. I wanted to hear what other people were doing. I wanted to speak to other women. I wanted to give them a platform. So I started visibility, and we started a talk show. And then I moved to a new organization. That was a headhunt. It was a bigger role, bigger opportunity, more money. It was just exactly what I needed at this time. Because again, I had gone through this flow at my other organization of starting in fresh, trying to climb this steep curve that I felt like I was never climbing. And then suddenly I went from like that to like that. And I was like skyrocketing. And I got to this point, and it's great, but I knew there has to be more. I got to this 10-year mark, and I was like, there has to be other stuff. There has to be more here, than I want to see other things. And so I got this new role, which is great. And so this was just around the same time that that I started visibility. I think I started visibility like a few months before. Then I moved into this new job and all of that good stuff. And so I continued doing that. And then we hit COVID, which put a pause on a lot of the recordings of visibility because we were recording live. We were recording in person. So we were recording in person. We couldn't anymore, so that put a hold on. We attempted to pivot into recording online. It just wasn't giving what it was supposed to give. But anyway, so there was a lot going on there. At the same time, I was going through a very difficult personal season. My dad had passed away, and if you have not noticed, I've spoken about my dad maybe like 3 times already in this conversation. So my dad is super influential and present in my life. And so it literally felt like I died. That was basically the experience that I had. I don't think I actually said it in those words, but it was like, yeah, you're my dad, but it literally felt like I just died, you know? And so, yeah, so a lot started to switch. A lot started to change. A lot started to, so I was still showing up at work. I was still doing the most. And, but I think I started having a lot more urgency about other things. So it's like, I know I'm great at what I do, but I have this innate desire to see people grow. And I know that when I do it, not only am I good at it, but I literally feel my heart shift. Like it's just such a magical feeling. And I want to do more. I want to do more of that. I was just engrossed in doing that. So I started, I created my first program. I started doing stuff. I started writing my book. So a lot of this is all happening whilst I'm still working, whilst I'm still navigating grief, whilst I'm still, figuring a lot of stuff out. And one thing that was a big thing for me was my dad was also into people development. He worked at some of the highest levels in government, for the states. And when he retired from being a civil servant, he went into professional development. So my dad was like an executive trainer,
Oh, wow.
and coach. So yes, my dad was into that. So I grew up with my dad having like a school of management studies and like development education. So I saw him train some of the leaders, some of the governors in our state were my dad's students. These are not folk tales. I have pictures of them. Like I have pictures of some of the leaders. They went through a lot of them went through mentorship and things like that. So I saw it. It was always something like, so I guess that thread was just always there for me. And maybe the spiritual part of it is when he died, it was almost like a mantle was passed. It was very strange. And so when he passed on, yeah, that feeling of just this is what you need to be doing just came like it quadrupled in that season. I just knew like, okay, I need to do something with this. And I also remember one of the most impactful things I think when he passed were the stories of people saying, your dad got me my first job. I wouldn't have got my first role without him. Your dad helped me with a really difficult work situation. Your dad paid for my first master's. Your dad, like, there were so many impactful things. Your dad, was just such a trustworthy person. I could always complain to him. Oh, your dad, there was one guy who said, I wouldn't be married today if it wasn't for your dad. Like I was ready to leave my family, and your dad asked me to come, and I stayed in the boys' quarters for 5 days, and he just mentored me for those 5 days, and he sent me back to my family. And I'm still married 40 years on or whatever.
It's powerful.
And so those stories for me was like, no one was talking about my dad being an amazing administrator or finance person or procurement leader or whatever. They were talking about the impact he had on them specifically. And when it comes down to what the essence of life is, that's what people are going to remember, not your job, not your job title, not how many deals you did, not not any of that. It was about the everyday moments of leadership, the everyday moments where he made a difference in every person's life just because of who he was. That has been the most profound lesson I have learned from him. And that's exactly the kind of life that I want to live. But he did it in his 50s. Like my dad retired, worked till his 50s,
Yeah, his
retired
30s.
in his 50s. I'm doing it in my 30s. Because I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to live my dad's life. I'm not trying to live his life. But I want to be who he was earlier. I want to be who he was faster. That's big for me. I want to do that faster. So that's huge.
Do you feel like
So I,
you
I,
are?
I, so I love the name of this podcast. Because this is exactly this is exactly how I lived. Is be an everyday leader, like be the change. Don't just complain. My dad I didn't grow up in a house where people complained. I grew up in a house where people said, okay, so what are you doing about it?
Yeah, take that
If you
action.
see the problem, what are you doing about it? Every place. My parents always say, leave, and I wrote about this invisible strengths. And it's like, leave every place better than you met it. Whether it's your play camp, like where your toys were. If you play, you put it back. If you go to a public bathroom, you clean it. It should never be worse than when you got there, and more so, it should even be better than when you get there. Don't use things and leave it. If you take on a new job, make sure by the time you leave, it's a better situation than you met it. The accounts are now in order. The filing is now in order. The people are now in the right place. Like, you have to always go everywhere thinking, what is the positive benefit of my presence here? And be intentional about that. And I grew up with seeing two individuals model that in the most exceptional way. Yeah.
So, what would your version of what your legacy, what would you want your legacy to look like for you? Not your dad's, but you, with what you've stepped into now. When you think about the impact and influence that you've already started to have, because I know there's thousands of people who talked about the impact you've had so far through visibility. But when you think about fully stepping into this now,
Yeah.
all in, full time, what do you want that to be for you?
It's a good question. I think for me, it would be that the, well, at the first layer is that my daughter will not come back home from work and be confused and frustrated and all of those things. That, at the most simple level, it's just pretty much that. Like, I want a space. I want a world, a work world, a whatever world where my child will go to the office and feel empowered and not defeated. Because that's the feeling that I had, and I don't want that for her at the most basic level. At least assuming I have, but either way, whether it's a girl or it's a boy, whatever, it's the same feeling. But more so than expanding that beyond my own first family is, I think, too many women in particular are underutilized. whether by their own design or by the design of others, but there's a big disconnect. And so I'm hugely passionate about seeing workplaces change, but I'm also hugely passionate about people seeing work as an enabling environment, where they can grow and they can thrive, and not something that there's a tick box. It's not supposed to be a tick box. It's an instruction. Like, being fruitful and multiplying is an instruction. So how you do that with joy is really like, there's nothing more important. But statistics suggest that at least 70% of people who are going to work hate their jobs, or at the very least hate who they do it with or for. That cannot be right. So I fundamentally can't. That thought just seems very conflicting. That the number one, or maybe not the number one. I guess the number one is love the Lord and love your neighbor as yourself. But beyond that, actually, the number one, I'll go back to that. The number one instruction to man was be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. That's the number one instruction. And then you then have there are many other instructions that you have that. But if you think about from chronologically, the chronological order was be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it. So it's so important, and work is one of those ways that is one of the primary ways that we do that, right?
Yeah.
But why should we do that in pain? Why should we do that crawling on our bellies and suffering? That's not the original intent. So yeah, so a very long-winded way. Maybe I haven't thought about it enough.
I think it's a very important one because we spent on average 90,000 hours
Yeah, it's wild.
of
A
of
lot
our
of
life
time.
at work, a third of our time. So if you're in an environment where you are not happy, you are not fulfilled, the repercussion is that impacts you, that impacts those you have around you, as well as their
Yeah.
family, friends, and ever, but also fundamentally the world because you don't end up pouring out any
Yeah.
gifts or talents that you might
Hmm.
have. So there's
Hmm.
so many different things around that.
Yeah. It's one of the most underestimated areas of change that we need to make. We're always talking about so many other things, but I'm like, where you work, the kind of work you do, all of that, like being truly yourself and being authentically yourself, nothing beats that. Living your own life, doing your own thing, in whatever format. Nothing beats that because we're all created differently, and consequently our lives should look differently. So I always love when I see people who are living authentically and independently in their own design. I'm always like, wow, that's beautiful. And I've always maybe looked at them with some level of, I won't say envy, but I don't think it's envy. I think it's just maybe being inspired by, like, wow, how do you get to the point where you're so empowered to live life on your own terms when we have a world that has already built a template for what life should look like, but then you decide to create your own thing. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. So I've always been very, like, intrigued by people who do that. I mean, that was definitely one of the most inspiring things when we met, because I was like, okay, this is cool, but okay, how did you get like, how did you figure this out? So I'm super glad that I'm now one of those people, because I think that was always one of my goals, was like, yeah, just be you and decide what you want to do and forget about all of that. There's no one pathway. And I was sharing with someone the other day, when you think about a career, it's just a portfolio of work. And per time, that work can look so different.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can say today, oh, I'm doing this. Next month, I'm doing something else. In 5 years' time, I'm doing something else. In the end, it's just a portfolio. It's a portfolio of work. And I think sometimes we don't see it that way. We're too stuck following a specific line that we don't allow ourselves the room to explore other things and be more things, right? I definitely don't want to be the servants that they give one talent. Like, I'm definitely not the one talent servant, that's for sure. But I'm then definitely not. I don't want to be the person who then buries their talent and does nothing with it, or only uses one and brings the rest back. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to be the person who appreciates everything that's in front of them, that has been given to them, and has the freedom to go and put everything to use. So then I can receive my well done, good and faithful servant at the end. That's important to me.
So, let me ask two more questions as we kind of come to the end of what has been an amazing interview. If I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, I see what you've done. I see how you've navigated. I might not have read the book. If you haven't, definitely go and do it, because she breaks this down even more with a great framework to actually help you to think about it. But
Mm.
I am someone who wants to step into the fullness. I want to step into my light. I want to be more visible. I want to navigate my career. What's the best way to work with you from both an individual perspective and a corporate organization, university perspective?
The thing was cutting off, so I didn't hear a lot of what you just said, actually.
So I was asking that if I'm someone who is listening to everything that you said, I've enjoyed your story, I'm going to go and buy the book. If you haven't, go and buy the book. But I want to advance my career. I want to step fully into my light and be more visible.
Mm.
What's the best way for both individuals and then I'm going to say organizations to work with you?
Wow, to work with me. um, I didn't think that was the question you were going to ask me. So but, okay. So individuals, best way to work with me is, let's have a conversation. That's really the starting point. It's, let's have a conversation. I can be found on LinkedIn, on socials. I'm sure all the details would be in the pack. But what I would challenge you to do first is get prioritize self-awareness. In between now and whenever you get to speak to me, is to prioritize self-awareness. And what that means is, be so intentional about understanding who you are, what you like, what you don't like really who you were. I won't use the word who you were created to be, but just really understand yourself, your knowledge bank, your skills, your talents, your experience. Like, really get a grip on that. Also know what you don't like, what you don't necessarily do well, or what you don't enjoy doing. That's important. Um, because everything stems from that, right? Everything stems from that. Finding career joy stems from making what you love the most of what you do. That's actually really it. And just reducing your exposure to the things that you don't enjoy doing. But you can only do that when you have some clarity around that. But yeah, so that's definitely what I would say, is like, start with self-awareness, so that by the time we do get on a phone call to have a conversation, um, we're having a an advanced conversation about alignment. It's either you are in the it's either you're in a great place and you just need to be pushed and progressed and advanced, or you are in the wrong place and you need to be repositioned. So, but none of that can happen if we don't fundamentally have a very strong sense of, and so a lot of the women who, predominantly women, not only but predominantly women who work with me, that's always the journey we first of all go on, is self-awareness. We spend weeks on that so that when we can craft like an ideal career, or an ideal career pathway, or even like a portfolio of careers, because sometimes it can look like that. It can look like you actually like this, you like this, you like this. We can do all of it, but we just need to chart our course and be smart about it. Then we can build effective strategy around that. For organizations, I do my work is really around consultancy as well as program delivery. So the nature of my work would be to work with either your learning and development teams or your ERGs. Are generally the way that my organization comes in, and we look at sort of the learning needs that you have aligned to the various strategic objectives that you have. So whether it's within a change management scope, an employee engagement scope, or an onboarding, so like the learning and development piece of an onboarding program or an advancement program. So they're usually different lines of work that we'll do, and the goal really is just to understand what are your strategic objectives, where are the gaps, and how can we fill it with targeted learning and development for your teams. The goal really is to ensure that you have people in your organization that are not just high potential but high performance. And so that's our work, is really to find that transition point to help them move from there, because it's only when they're high performance that they're basically high value for the organization, and high value people are what bring in ROI for the firm. And so we contact details are also either hitting me up on LinkedIn or via email, and we can start a conversation on your business needs and then how we can plug in to help you achieve those with your people.
How do you define leadership?
Oh, how do I define leadership? Right influence. That's how I define leadership, is right influence. Positive influence, shall we put it that way? Um, Positive influence is the short form way I think about it. But I would say being able to direct yourself and others towards positive outcomes that improve rather than deplete the world that we live in. I'm gonna need that definition because I just came up with that right now. I'm gonna need to write that down.
I like it.
But
I
yeah,
like it. And
um,
one of the things that I really appreciate, actually, which I don't think a lot of people get to hear a lot about, is what is the truth, or what's the reality of people's journeys. And I love that you put it, obviously you put into the book, which is great. But just hearing you to be able to be like, I'm 5 years into this thing, I'm doing well out externally, I'm getting the promotions and stuff like that, but inside it's been a struggle. And there's so many different things you had to go through to change, to learn, to shape and craft and fully step into yourself. And that's a journey that a lot of people don't ever see or understand. But reality is a lot of people go through that. And you having the openness and the vulnerability to be consistently sharing that, either through your audiences and your communities that you've created, through the talks I've seen you actually give, through content you have on LinkedIn, through the book, and through the other bits and pieces that you're doing now. For me, I think it's such a great example of you when you talk about your legacy and the impact you want to have on other people. Even by you just doing that and just sharing, you're already doing that. You're already impacting the lives of people. You're already helping people to see themselves in your story, and also recognize that this is not the end, that they can do something different. They can step out and live the lives that they have been called to live. Yeah, I'm going to use that phrase. So You are already stepping into the legacy that you want to create in the world in your own way, learning and leaning into that mantle that your dad passed into you. And it's such a great thing to be able to watch, to be able to champion, to be able to encourage as well, because the world needs a lot more of it.
Thank you so much. So I know the system will pick it up. I don't know how it works, but I know Riverside will pick it
We'll pick it up. We'll pick it up. We'll pick it up somehow. We'll pick it up.
up. Yeah, we'll pick it up. But thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. It's a good conversation.
This is Everyday Leadership. We'll see you next week.